Hello lovelies, today we're continuing our explorations of the more obscure corners of my RPG collection, and we're reviewing Adventures in Kaphornia, number 1, Draconian Rhapsody, and number 2, The Island of the Pirhana Men. Now I should declare an interest in that these were published through Crikle City for a while, so I did have a vested financial interest in their success. Not so much anymore, as far as I can remember. And I did have a quick Google around to see if there were any more in the series, but it seems that there were only 2, which will be interesting to consider as we proceed here. There has been a kind of a trend for quite some time, probably since at least Dogs in the Vineyard, for the story gaming sort of side of things to create hyper-focused games where they only tell one particular kind of story or one particular kind of arc or explore one particular topic, or everything is centered around one particular mechanic. A lot of really focused stuff. Probably the peak of that is something like Lady Blackbird, which is a very specific game with a very specific story. The replay value is limited, shall we say. And in some ways, this is the story game equivalent of modules, in that replay value, replayability, and so on is generally fairly low, all things considered. And the old D&D modules used to come with pre-generated characters. Well, these are kind of a more old-school approach to that singular, focused game, taken to its logical extreme. It bills itself as make yourself and your friends a nice evening for the price of 2 movie tickets, which, when you consider role-playing game pricing, you do get tremendous value for money. If you compare to something like cinema, it's not an entirely accurate comparison because tabletop gaming takes work. Someone has to be the games master. You have to really think about what you're doing and making choices and so on. These are the things that make it a great form of entertainment, but it's work, whereas movies are kind of passive. And when you buy something more permanent, like a book, I think you want more long-term value from it. But this is the angle that they came at it from. So you get an adventure, and you get pre-generated characters, and it contains all the system and everything that you need. It's all extremely basic. 6 six-sided dice, some stones or coins to use as markers. It's all very simple. And there are advantages to this approach in that characters can be very strictly defined, and they can have plot hooks and so on that place you in that adventure and relate to that adventure. You can be very specific, but at the cost of customization and adaptability and creating your own characters, which is a huge part of the broad appeal of role-playing games a lot. So you can see here, barbarian, various sort of typical statistics and numerical values, stamina, which is basically health points, fate points that let you use special abilities or recover any special powers that they have, and so on. And then we have a paladin type as well, a dwarf in an inexplicable fedora, a fairy, clearly aimed at the family here, a traditional witch with broomstick and familiar, and so it goes. A thief. The art's quite nice. And it's all very simple, which is all to its credit, but it is very set, and that's the thing. I mean, I can't show you much more without spoiling the adventure, but it's divided up into scenes, which are kind of very strictly laid out. It is a very, very guided, very, very basic, very, very graspable form of an adventure, and that's both to its credit and not. There were some extras. There was an extra adventure in this one, and the character art and everything is very nice. Trouble is, I really can't talk about too much, so it's hard to review. The system's simple, adaptable. You could easily take it on and do something else with it if you wanted to. There's a couple of different characters in each of the different books. You are supposed to expand and gain experience between the games, but that's very laid out again. There's handouts of things that you can print out, like cards, which talk about what things do. So everything is very set and very laid out, and that makes it very accessible and very easy for anyone to pick up and play. So it's more like a board game in a lot of ways, in that you can basically you have everything you need to play in one book, and that's what makes it work. But it's also what limits it a great deal. That you could, like I say, take the system and do something else with it. I'm trying to figure out what more I can actually say. It's a dice pool system, so you roll a number of dice equal to your skill, plus or minus modifiers, 5s or 6s, count as successes. See how you do overall. When you're fighting monsters, obviously you'll be competing against them and so on. The adventures are quite silly, largely family oriented, with a few little very sort of slight horror elements, and it is what it says. It's basically a fantasy movie for your game table, like it says. It's a good idea. It's a nice idea. I just don't know whether it works for the existing role-playing market at all. Maybe it's trying to expand it, but it never had the reach, the broad appeal to reach the people it might have won over to gaming. It's incredibly set. It would be a very good way of introducing your children or your nephews or friends of your kids to role-playing, because it's so set and because it's so easily graspable and understood. But it is so limited because you can basically only play it once, because then all the secrets and everything are out, and there's just no replay value, even less so than conventional adventure modules, because with those at least you can take the monsters or traps or locations and reuse them sometimes, and quite often modules would contain additional rules that you could then use in something else. It's really hard to gauge or to judge it, and this is something I kind of want to dip my toe into, this kind of hyper-focused tell one particular story. But I'm extremely conscious of the fact that goes against everything that makes role-playing games so appealing. The broadness, the openness, the idea that you can do anything, that you can create your own character who can be whatever you want. And this goes against all of that. But at that cost comes the bonuses of accessibility, ease, rapid play. It's probably most like signing up for a convention session and sitting down with your pre-generated character and playing. That's what this is closest to. Great introductory game, and an interesting curiosity if you're a game designer. Otherwise, I think the shortcomings just aren't worth it for most normal gamers in most normal situations, and the kinds of people that could really use this aren't going to be aware of it, unfortunately. Scores. Style, they are very stylistic, very well illustrated in a sort of slightly cartoony style, but I like it. It works for the material that they've got here. So I'm going to give it a style, considering all the other factors, all the way up to 5. Substance. This is the tricky part. I mean, for what it sets out to do, it has everything that you need, but it's not a complete game in the sense that a lot of games are complete games. If you were to turn it into your own game, you would have a lot of work ahead of you, trying to expand it and create your own adventures and so on. There's basically no support for that whatsoever. Yet at the same time, it contains everything that you need. So yeah, the substance is significant for what's there, what you need. It's just insignificant for any other purpose. And then of course replay value and other value from reading the book and so on, that's all extremely low as well. So I can only really give it a 3 in substance. It would be 2 if it weren't so hyper focused on this one issue and being everything that you technically need. So 3 for substance, which gives it an overall score of 8 or 4 out of 5, which is good, but really be aware of the limitations and the issues and what this is for, which is perhaps introducing people who otherwise wouldn't get involved in role-playing, or new people to role-playing. That's what these are good for. So long as you keep that in mind, or you're a designer who's curious, worth your time. Zang.
Stereo notes, it's prohibited. Flattery,